see it 2 weeks ago to this day, and gosh, you want to talk about it?
I did. I got to hit it before I got to see it. Yeah, doing great. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to Park Commission meeting number 493 and ask Michelle if we have a quorum. We do. Thank you very much. First thing on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting conducted by Vice Chairman Parker, who was sitting next to me a minute ago. Do we have any corrections, additions?
Move to...
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait a minute.
Opposed?
I just have to.
Oh, you do
say
have
this.
one. I asked you.
One. I know. It just dawned on me. This is for Dean. There is a cook bay and there is a cook's bay.
Kathy, we'll talk about this after the meeting. Okay, continue on.
But yes, other than that, yes, everything is fine.
Is that anywhere in the minutes?
It was a previous one. It was a, yeah.
It's a long story.
Don't even go there.
Don't even go there.
Okay.
Okay, I have a bunch of ayes. Do I have any nays? Thank you. We finally got the minutes approved. Fiscal actions report. Everybody had a copy? Any questions? Any additions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Project review actions report. Joe, resolution?
Yep. Resolution 20-01. I'm sorry, 2020-01. Whereas the Commission has received and reviewed the project review action report prepared by the staff and dated that date, and whereas the project review committee recommends acceptance of the project review action report, now therefore be resolved that the Commission directs that the project review action report be incorporated in the minutes of the full Commission meeting with the date of January 28th. So moved.
Been moved and seconded to approve the project review actions report. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. We'll move on to projects. First project today is a Class A marina modification by Dunham's Bay Road LLC.
No, we're moving Ferguson up. Yeah, we're going to do Ferguson first,
We're
right?
going to do Ferguson
We're going to
first?
do Ferguson first, because Molly has to
Sorry,
take
we
off.
flipped the agenda on you, so we're
Just
going
those
to do
two.
the Ferguson project first. And that's my project.
Okay, I'll rearrange my
I'll give you
speech.
a little background on it. Sorry about that. Did you want to do the preamble?
Nope, we'll do the first. We'll do Ferguson as the first project. No problem.
Okay. This is an application for a variance to place a 12.5-foot wide by 11-foot 9 long jet ski ramp. And this is a structure that was placed, the location is Oahu Island, and it was placed without a permit. We've gone through enforcement, it's been removed, and we're now coming in for a variance. It's a little bit of an unusual situation, whereas we have two separate lakefronts belonging to the same parcel, one on each side of the island. We've encountered these before. There's numerous ones on islands and peninsulas around the lake. And when we do have two separate lakefronts, the regulations don't specifically address that type of situation. But our general approach to these is that we take, as staff, the conservative approach that each lakefront is treated individually with respect to how many docks it can have and with respect to its setbacks. And then the total lakefront also rules over doing no more than X number of docks. So what we're looking at is the smaller of the two lakefronts on this. There's a total of 477 feet of lakefront, but the one on the south side of the island is about 60 feet.
No, the north side.
Oh, north side, sorry. There's a good side and a bad side to the island, which Mr. Ferguson will fill in on that. So what they've done, or plan to do, is cluster their docks. There is a U-shaped dock already on this 60 feet of lakefront, which is already too much dock for 60 feet of lakefront. It's grandfathered because it was placed prior to a subdivision of the property, so it wound up a little closer to the one property line than it would have been, when it was permitted. So we've got a U-shape there, and then this jet ski ramp, it's we're treating it somewhat like a boat lift, but not. And it acts somewhat like a boat lift. The jet skis, it has some square footage, which is the difference between that, this and a boat lift. Boat lifts with no square footage, they're allowed to be in a 20-foot setback. Because this has a dock in the middle of these two berths for the jet skis, it can't be in the setback. So it needs a variance from the setback, and it needs variance from the number of docks that would be allowed on a 60-foot lakefront. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Burson.
Thank you, and sorry for screwing up the schedule and starting off on a bad foot here. So just quick history. My grandfather bought the island in the 1950s from the Bellinger sisters. He used to row into town once a week to apparently go buy groceries and go to church. So there was rowboats there. We are in the main house, which is now 2 Oahu. My grandfather subdivided the property into 4 lots. It's been in the family for that time until my uncle sold in the 1980s. My cousin sold, I think, in the later 80s or early 90s. And then our house is, the one I grew up in is 3 Oahu. We bought my cousin's house in 2009. And so that was the house that has the jet ski ramp. So the point is there was some ramps there from the Bellinger sisters with the rowboats. My cousins also had a ramp there and a sailboat, but it was a smaller ramp than what's there now. I agree on that. In 2012, I had what my wife would call my midlife crisis. Decided to buy a couple jet skis. Chris Gabriel's built the jet ski ramp. We kind of talked about it. That was the best location for it. He didn't think we needed a ramp. He does a lot of work on the lake. Obviously, he's been wrong in this case. I have a bunch of pictures in the application kind of showing you where the ramp is, how it's kind of tucked in. It's right against the dock. We are very good stewards of the lake. I don't know, you guys, I don't know if you know the history. When we bought my cousin's house, it had a failing septic system. We paid to get the pure flows in there. We actually increased the capabilities on 3 Oahu, even though that had a functioning septic system. We combined them all. Much better system than it was before. We rarely care about the lakes. My kids, myself, we're always picking up garbage from the lake, helping out boaters. So this is not trying to kind of pull one over. Like, we love the lake. We're up there all the time. So anyway, it came to our attention when Lieutenant Johns and Ms. Gallagher came to the property out in the summertime. They were measuring out, and they said this is not in compliance. So it took a little while for them to kind of review all the records, get back to us in September. After that time, we'd already the dock had already been pulled out and everything for the winter. So I had pictures that I was able to have from just history to kind of show it. I have a couple letters from our neighbors. On 1 Oahu is the Malovenes. On 4 Oahu is Dr. Fox. Letters basically saying that this is the ideal location for the jet ski ramp. I have a bunch of pictures in there, and I can kind of go through them if you want, talking about where the actual location is. If we can't get this variance, we can move it to 3 Oahu, which is basically the one that I grew up in. There's a lot of space there. It doesn't have any setback rules, but you can see from those pictures it's really going to stick out a lot more than where it is right now. It's very well tucked in. The other alternative is that we can combine the properties, and then there's no setback rule. If we do that, we have to go through a lawyer. And by the way, if we move the ramp, it's an almost $11,000 cost. I have an estimate in there from Chris Gabriel's. It's a lot of money, and trust me, we're never happy about paying Chris as much as we do. It's just we don't have a lot of choices. He's the only one with a barge. Building out there is probably 2 to 3 times more expensive than what it would be otherwise. The other option, as I was kind of getting into, is we can combine the properties. Then we wouldn't have the setback rules. We'd be able to get the variance or whatever it was to kind of build to keep the jet ski ramp where it is. But there's a letter in there from the realtor, Willie B. McDonald, saying that would impact the value of our properties combined by almost $500,000, $400,000 to $500,000. That's her number. If that happens, it's also going to have an impact on the tax stuff for Bolton because we pay on property taxes. Her argument is that the combined property is just a lot bigger. There's going to be less buyers who want to buy that much versus having the separate properties. To be clear, we don't have any intention of selling these properties in the foreseeable future. I have 3 kids. My brother has 3 kids. They all love it up there. So, we get a lot of use out of the lake and everything else. So that's the loss of return that I think you guys were asking for. So any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any other commissioners have any questions for the applicant at this time?
What's that?
Looks like nobody's asking questions.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Well, I have
came-
a question for staff. I wasn't clear on what the hardship is for this variance.
I think the hardship is,
It can't be put on the larger part of
the hardship is that we can move it, but it's going to cost us almost $11,000. There's an estimate in the packet there. I also don't think it actually helps the appearance of the lake, because it's going to be a lot more apparent for the average person driving by on the boat or hiking on the mountains or camping out. So it's a higher elevation. We're going to have to cut down probably 20 trees. It's going to be a bigger ramp because of the higher elevation. So there's a hardship is $11,000 to move it. The other thing is, I don't think from an aesthetic purpose it actually helps the value of the lake. The other hardship is that the easier way for us, and which we'll probably end up doing, is we'll combine the properties. So we have to hire a lawyer, we have to go through the process with the town to kind of do all that, and that's going to impact the value of the property by $400,000 to $500,000. It's the realtor's estimate in the letter and yours. I didn't give her any guidance on that. I told her what the scenario was. Her argument is that two properties together is a bigger property. There's going to be less buyers than two individual properties. You can talk to her. Phone number's in there if you want. And if the combined property value is $400,000 to $500,000 less, she points out that that has an impact on the tax rolls for Bolton as well.
$500,000 less without the jet?
No, just combining the properties. If we were, the one thing is, if we were to wanted to keep the jet ski ramp where it is right now, we combine the properties, there's no setback rule, because there's no property line anymore.
See, Bruce, one of the things that I understand, I'm in sympathy with you in that situation, because the situations where people own properties that are basically originally separate lots, but now owned by the same person, and now you're trying to do a setback thing. I mean, we have that same problem up at our place, because my dad has a partnership, we have a family corporation, blah, blah. There are areas where those two things butt together, okay? And now we're treated as if they were different, owners. And the answer from Molly and others is that well, if you were going to sell it, then, you'd have to pay attention to the setback. And I'm saying, like you were saying, okay, we're not going to sell it. We haven't sold it in 200 years. We're probably not going to start today. Okay, but we still have to pay attention to a setback that basically really doesn't exist for us. I think we have to sit down as a committee one of these days and figure out how to deal with a situation like that.
And I think to that point, we also are more than willing to, if you want to have a letter in the deed that says, if we ever sell one of the properties, we have to resolve the issue. That's, to your point, we don't have any plans, but I respect the fact that if we ever do, you don't want to be kind of stuck with that, and that's fair.
Anybody else have any questions?
As far as the property line goes, we need to find out where all the, where you're going to set off, where all the stakes are, what the property line is, because that's kind of, you're not really sure about that, isn't that correct?
We know where the property line is, but when this all came about, it was after, basically the dock was all out, so we don't know exactly where the dock sits versus a property line. We didn't have time to get a surveyor to come out and
So
kind of make.
you really need to do that.
I understand. It's just with the season, the dock comes out. So I think Molly had mentioned that if you guys did give us a variance, we'd have to get some kind of, drawing or whatever survey done. We'd have to just do that when, obviously, the season allows. Yeah, that's not what Yeah, the dock was set up, the U-shaped dock was there because when my cousins, so my grandfather bought the island, split it into two, right? So he kept half. He had my dad, my uncle. His brother bought the other half, and he had two sisters, and they ended up splitting. But the north side of the island is where it's more sheltered. The south side, you really can't put anything there, and that's one of the kind of the hindrances of us. We have a lot of property value or lakefront on the south side. It's just not protected at all. You can't really do anything with it. There's one swimming dock on the south side in front of Cynthia's house.
Anybody got any other questions? Yeah. Thank you, sir. I have a question for staff. Are there any objections from any of the neighbors? No. And this does not increase the actual variance would be. This is an initial variance for this property, correct?
Yes.
So we're not really asking for any increase or anything like that. This is just for, I think I know what the answers are to these questions, but I would like to see them in the record.
Certainly. Yes.
Any of the commissioners have any comment on this before we vote?
Resolution 2020-3, application number 5220-44-8, construction applicant is Keith Works. Whereas the applicant has applied for a permit to replace a 12.5-foot wide and 11.9 wide long jet ski ramp. And whereas Lake George Park Commission has reviewed the application, supporting documents, comments received, and other information which appears in the record, and whereas the Commission has made a determination pursuant to 6 NYCRR 645-3.6 and the State Environmental Quality Review Act of 6 NYCRR 617.5 that the project is a Type 2 action and does not require further review of potential environmental impacts pursuant to this act. And whereas the action is considered to be a minor project pursuant to 6 NYCRR 645-5.2, public notice has been published and distributed. And whereas the applicant has requested a variance from 6 NYCRR 646-1.1C, number 7, the maximum docks, works, or moorings permitted per lakefront lot or parcel shall be limited as follows. 45 to 65 feet of lakefront, one dock or wharf constructed as a straight pier. A minimum of 45 feet is required for the construction of a wharf. Number 11, every dock or wharf constructed shall have a minimum setback of 20 feet from the adjacent property line extended into the lake on the same axis as the property line runs on shore, where it meets the lake or at a right angle to the mean high water mark, whichever results in a greater setback. And whereas the applicant has demonstrated that the strict conformance with the regulation will cause unnecessary hardship due to unique and peculiar circumstances which impose substantial financial, technical, and safety burdens. And whereas the Commission finds that there is no reasonable possibility that the applicant's property will bring a reasonable return found in conformance with the regulations, and the Commission finds that the project possesses the only necessary variance required to alleviate the hardship. The Commission finds that the project will have no adverse impact on the health, safety, and welfare of the public. The environment and resources of the park will not alter the essential character of the area which is proposed, will not lead to congestion in the park, and it will not have an undue visual, cultural, audible impact on the neighborhood or the park. Now, therefore, be resolved that the Lake George Park Commission hereby approves the request for variance to approve the above application as proposed. So moved. A survey on the subject land parcel with the existing work shall be submitted prior to the issue of the permit. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the application. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you. The application's been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we move to the Dunham's Bay application.
Yeah, so this is, the applicant is 10 Dunham's Bay Road, LLC. They've made applications for 2 permits, a marina modification and a dock modification. Regarding the marina, they seek to reduce seasonal berthing vessels from 28 to 14 and increase their motorized rental fleet from 12 to 20. With respect to the dock modification, the applicant seeks to modify an existing boathouse from a peaked roof to a sun deck. The applicant's agent, Attorney Jeff Myers, is here to represent the application.
Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jeff Meyer. I'm an attorney with Meyer, Fuller, and Stockwell here in Lake George. With me today in the back is Ed Anker with Finney Design, Owen Spolstra with EDP, and Matt O'Hara on behalf of Freedom Boat Club. I guess a quick just a question for Mr. Chairman. do you want to handle them completely separate, or just kind of throw everything at the commissioners? Or, because there's obviously two things going on here.
Let's do the boats first.
The boats first? Certainly. So what is being proposed is my client is proposing to reduce the total number of vessels using the facility to 6. That is being accomplished in 2 ways. One is we're reducing the number of seasonal berths by 14, and we are increasing the number of rental berths by 8. And I guess rental, put in air quotes, this project has kind of found its way into some ambiguities in the code. There is no true definition for the ownership structure that my client is using, but because there are other people using a single boat, the Commission considers them rental vessels. In practicality, it's more akin to a timeshare, or if my partner Matt and I owned a boat together and docked it at this marina. But because of the classification, we're fine. We're reducing the number of boats. We're changing how the boats are characterized, but it obviously requires a modification to the permit. To some of the points that have been raised previously in some of the letters, we did provide the supporting data and the information to show usage rates over the past year relative to the existing rental boats. What we found is, during the week, the boats are used less than once a day. At the weekends, it's used just over once a day. So practically speaking, it's used the same as any other common ownership seasonal vessel, which is why the reduction of 6, we think it'll positively impact Dunham's Bay and Lake George. We've operated for a year. We haven't had any reports of any issues with the owners. Our owners are required to go through extensive training, and prior to even taking the vessel, the boats are coming in and leaving out of essentially single points, even though they're docked in different spaces. And we found that this has worked not just in Lake George, but around the country. Happy to answer any questions or provide more detail. The staff and Mr. Fuller have gone back and forth on some revisions and some comments, so I believe all of the questions have been answered, and I'm happy to answer
them. It's an obvious question at the end, and I know the answer to everybody else does, but these boat rentals are strictly for membership only and not for transit.
Correct. I, as not a member...
No change from last year's operation.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Any other commissioners have any questions at this time?
Yeah, I have one. You stated that on the rentals, that's usually one person a day. Is that correct? That for the boat sitting there, it only goes out once a day with the one renter most of the time. Is
right.
That correct?
Well, because the way the ownership structure is set up is it costs the same for a half day or a full day.
Right.
So what we found is people will just take it for the full day.
Most
right.
of the time.
And
okay.
we're happy to do that. The average is like 1.1 trips per day on the weekends.
Okay.
And during the weekdays, it's 0.6.
0.6 during the week.
Right.
And 1.1 on the weekend.
Correct.
Okay. That's good.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, there might be value in just highlighting for the attendees and the commissioners again. Joe Cohen spent many hours going through the details of Dunham's Bay Marina, the different operations in that bay, and how these might impact. The original. They're going back to what was originally requested last year. The commission cut it down a bit to check and give it a test of what it looked like. But I want to make sure I know this is a lot of information for you guys to digest. It may be worthy of Joe just kind of highlighting a little bit of that for you guys to talk about what those impacts.
I was going to get to him anyway about the number of launches and so forth.
Perfect. Yeah. I guess that's what I'm suggesting.
Yep.
Yeah, so
I'm fully recovered. I'm ready. I'm on it.
All right.
as Mr. Meyer
Are
put
there
out,
any further questions from the applicant at this time? I'll get to Joe.
I didn't say a word. I just wait a minute.
There's an organization for this.
Let's see.
You can sit down because nobody wants to raise and ask a question.
Thank you.
My choice now is whether to go to Joe, or I think I'd like to hear from you first, Joe, on your analysis of the traffic situation in Dunham's Bay both with the marina and general.
Sure. So as we know, this site is located in Dunham's Bay. We have a recreation study in 2016 that identified this bay as being over capacity based on the number of boats in the bay for the aerial extent that people can boat within. It's roughly 3 to 4 acres per boat. The study states the optimal density is roughly 13 acres per boat, but it's that in a 5-mile-an-hour zone, which this bay is entirely a 5-mile-an-hour zone, the perception of congestion changes because everyone's going a lot more slowly than they would out in the open water. And so based on the perception of boaters, which was captured in that same boating study in a survey, very few people pointed this bay out as being a congested place where they felt like there was too much density. With respect to the application itself, compared with the pre-19 operation under the Dunham's Bay Sea Ray, we're seeing a proposed net reduction in vessels, so 12 less vessels than under the Sea Ray operation. But as noted, we have a change in use. Instead of someone that is a typical annual boat registration holder or a dock owner who might use their boat 2 to 3 times a week, the goal of any rental business is to have that boat go out at least once a day or twice a day. In this case, Matt, in his application indicated he anticipated an average of 1.5 times per day for each boat. We hear those numbers are a little bit less from 2019, but we understand this is a growing business, so we still made our estimates based on that 1.5 boat trips per day. And based on that, we'd expect an increase in boat trips in the bay to be roughly 12 boat trips per day based on the change in use from seasonal ownership to boat rentals, essentially. And what we tried to do is look at the total use in the bay, so not just the change of the facility, but how does this look in the context of all activity in Dunham's Bay? We've got a lot of residential docks, we have a couple of other marinas that have boats on them, and we have a public launch. So trying to look at what does 12 boats per day mean in the context of all activity, we estimate, based on the pre-2019 usage, that it's going to be roughly 7% increase in boat trips daily during the week and roughly 4% on the weekends. And that's excluding the launch. The launch is kind of an X factor. We estimate roughly 18 to 34 trips, launches through the boat launch. I heard this morning a question to our ranger who operates the steward program, how many boats get inspected at the Dunham's Bay Station. I think it was over 1,000.
Like 750.
750.
Okay, 750. So the analysis included both the boat launch and without the boat launch, just because it's hard to guess exactly what goes through the boat launch based on what goes through the inspection station. So excluding activity from the boat launch, we're looking at potential percent increases of 7% on the weekday and 4% on the weekend, when we would expect in general there to be more use. So big picture, 12 less boats at the facility, less boats in the bay, but 12 more boat trips maximum on a daily basis due to that change in use that we're hearing about.
Is it possible to factor in the gas sales? I mean, Dunham's Bay Sea Ray, I believe, used to do a fairly substantial in-and-out gas sale.
We unfortunately don't have numbers for that. We tried to grab numbers from wherever we had them, just to kind of provide a little complexion to this and get a feel for all the use in the bay. We don't have the numbers on gas. That, of course, would increase the overall use in the bay, and the relative difference would be less.
Well, wouldn't that be included in the survey that we did 2 years ago or whatever it was?
Yeah, certainly. There's no new gas. Yeah.
The gas going in and out.
Yeah.
We were taking a survey of all the boats in the bay.
So we don't have any direct data on the gas, but you're right. In 2016, when the recreational study was done, all those gas businesses were in operation, so that should be reflected indirectly.
You said, I think it was 7% and 4%, the incremental increases. That was not overall, was it? Was that the percentage of increase out of this operation? That's
compared to all activities estimated for the day.
All activities? Oh, that seems high. That percentage seems like, on the one hand, it seems like just an incremental increase, but that seems like...
Yeah, and so based on the approval from, I think it was April of 2019, that authorized half of the original ask, in theory, we would have seen half of that incremental increase in 2019. So in theory, the folks in Dunham's Bay, experienced a 3.5% increase in boat traffic during weekdays this year and a 2% increase in boat traffic on weekends. Just because the applications were made in kind of short order, I compared them to pre-operation status because that's kind of what everyone's probably imagining in their mind as to how Downers Bay operates.
Anybody else have any questions from Joe's explanation? Okay, is there someone else here in the audience that wants to speak about this application?
Yeah, hi. I'm Phil Mitchell. I reside in Salem. I sent a letter in. My parcel that I own is 5 places north of the proposed Freedom Boat Company, the applicant's place. Joe does a nice job evaluating things. Relative to the congestion and the number of boats being changed of use, changed over, slips being changed over to rental slips, we have to be careful in our analysis to start with the right assumptions. His assumption is that Freedom Boat Company is going to always be there and going to always operate the same way, which would be great. 3% is not a big number. 3% is not upsetting anybody, and with the 5-mile-an-hour limit in the bay, it's not a problem. My greatest concern is that once these are designated rental slips, new owner comes along, conditions change for Freedom Boat Company. Now you have a situation where a guy has a facility that has a number of rental slips available to him, and he changes his business model. His business model changes to who knows what. Hourly rentals, one after another. Who knows? So that changes that whole congestion model. Now let's back up a little bit. When I was a young man, I'd water ski in the bay. It was nuts, I have to admit, looking back at it with a little more maturity. There'd be 3 or 4 boats circling in there, one after another, pulling water skiers. Why there weren't more accidents, I don't know. It was a miracle. And that's why the 5-mile-an-hour limit got imposed, so there wouldn't be congestion. And now, congestion is an environmental issue. Can we agree to that? More is worse than less. And so now, I don't know where it came from exactly, and I know you use good metrics and all, but now we have a situation where, we're not at the threshold where we start having accidents anymore. This is great. We can have more congestion. I don't get it. In the bay, we're trying to eliminate all the environmental factors that impact the bay. There's a consortium within the bay. We've started trying to limit the amount of BOD that goes in the bay. When we get below the limit where algal blooms, we're already below the limit where algal blooms are likely. So what are we going to do? Say, let's not go any further? No. The guys in the bay have gotten together and we're putting in septic systems all around the bay to get lower than the limit. And here we have a congestion vector, a congestion pollution vector where we say, hey, we're below the limit where there's a problem. Let's use that up and give all that congestion to one person. That increase in congestion to one person. I don't get it. I can't see this increase in rental continuing on. And furthermore, when one person asks for rental approval on his dock slips, what's to prevent everybody else from asking for rental permission? I just see this as a case where something's going to grow and grow and grow. I talk about algal blooms, we can talk about rental. And so please don't permit this increase. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one comment, sir. Your first assumption that should they cease to exist and somebody else picks up this property, do not pick up the marina permit. They have to go through the whole process. You don't just pass on a marina permit. So if somebody bought this property, they would buy the physical plant, but they don't buy the marina permit. You can't sell a marina permit. And council can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I think that's the way the law reads.
Well, that may...
it was just...
I believe you, but I understand that's how the thing works now that you've told me.
If you walked in there and bought this property, you'd have to start all over again and say, I want to operate a marina, and this is the way I want to operate it. You don't automatically get all of the privileges and slots and boats that he has. You just buy the physical property. You don't buy the marina permit. I just brought that up because your first opening argument was you were worried about passing on these slips.
Well,
okay, so you can put that at ease. That problem is not going to exist.
Okay, thank you. And I think it would be hard for the board, I can imagine it would be hard for the board to step back and say a new owner is not allowed to have those rental slips that the last owner had.
It wouldn't be hard for this board member.
Well, board members change. We're all getting gray hair now. So
and if you can remember, the original granting of the application was this setup was based on their particular type of operation versus a general marina operation. In other words, I know a lot of the commissioners were convinced that these boat operators that regularly go to these things are much better boat operators than what normally comes into Red Boat Lake. So there were a lot of considerations to this particular operation taken into mind when we granted the permit. So if it's somebody else, I'm not automatically going to say they get those, and I'm sure everybody else around here feels that. You got to start from scratch if you want to open up a marina.
How about if
I'm not arguing against everything. I'm trying to put you at ease on this point
right.
brought up.
Right, and to tell me the board's thinking on this, and that's good. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, how about the case where this board, where this owner chooses to operate in a different business model? Does he have to come back to the board?
Yes.
I would say yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I could interject for a moment, Chairman. If I could interject just for a moment, just to clarify, you can actually transfer a marina permit, but the marina needs to operate under the same scope in which the application was made and which was approved, and in abiding with any conditions that are on that permit. So any change in the scope, any change in services, any change from what's reviewed and approved would have to come back, and that goes to your second question is, if they want to change the way they want to operate and go out 3 times a day, 4 times a day, 5 times a day, that we would see as a change in services, a substantive change that would have to come back to this board, and of course have to be sent out to the public.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matt O'Hara. I'm the applicant. Just to address the common term that's getting used and some of the concerns of rental, we don't consider ourselves a rental. We were kind of shoehorned into rental because the shared boating model doesn't exist in parks regulations. If there was a boat club permit that we could apply for, we'd be applying for that and not a rental permit. The fact is it doesn't exist, so here we are as rentals. My family, my wife is one of 5. She's got 3 cousins. There's 8 people that share their boat. On a Saturday in the summer, that boat is in and out of the dock 3 times because we use it with our kids, our cousin uses it with their kids, and our shared model is much more similar to that than anyone coming off the street and renting a boat. So I know we keep saying rental permit, rental boat. That is not a term we use. We stay far away from that. I've seen rental operations up close, and I never want to be near or around a daily rental boat business. And I would prefer if we could use boat rental as a term, or boat club as a term. But if rental is the term we have to use, we use it. I just not think that is our business and what we really do. So.
Thank you. Someone else in the audience.
My name is John Collins. I live at 35 Knox Road, which is Assembly Point. Few comments, both micro and macro. Micro. We've had discussion today about the activity in Dunham's Bay, and the focus has been, it's 4 to 7% increase in activity. Not bad. However, we are in an overcrowded situation already. You're just adding to the overcrowding. At some point, you have to stop activity and stop perpetuating a problem. In this case here, Joe, you mentioned that if the average is 13 acres a boat, we're here at 3. Gee, that doesn't seem to be a problem in terms of perception by the people using Dunham's Bay. That's only 25% of what we believe the average is that ought to be utilized for boats. So it is significant overcrowding in the lake, in Dunham's Bay. Now, let's step back and let's look at the lake overall, because we can't just make decisions in a vacuum. We have to think about the lake. And with regard to the lake, we wrote a letter dated October 30th pointing out, I'll call them shortcomings in the data being utilized to analyze traffic on the lake. The single biggest thing is the boat launch at $1 Million Beach. It's putting in over 7,000 boats a year, and that never got picked up in the study done in 15 for the report dated in 15 or 16, whatever. Secondly, the lake was divided into grids. And from Assembly Point across to the west side of the lake, that's 2 grids and covers a lot of lake acreage. And it may or may not be overcrowded based on the 13 acres per boat captured in the day that the boats were counted to form the basis of the report. But the reality is this. Very few of the boats go down the middle of the lake. They crowd the shoreline, whether it be the west side or the east side. That's just the way it is. And as a result, we do have overcrowding close to the shoreline on both sides of the lake. And any increased activity is going to add to the overcrowding in the lake. Now, you mentioned we're down 6 boats because the applicant wants to increase the Freedom fleet from 12 to 20, but take the rent of seasonal from 28 to 14, so the net is 6 less boats. Those boats don't necessarily disappear. They may just become trailered boats in. They may go to another dock in the South Basin or the North Basin. Don't know. So we can't just count those boats as being off the grid because they're no longer renting at the Dunham's Bay facility. Now and so what we asked was that all approvals of additional boats be tabled until you can have an updated study that captures what's really going on in the lake today, especially with the boat launch. Now I step back and say, all right, this is America. Everybody's got a right to a business. Is this placing an undue hardship on Freedom? Joe, you talked about the average usage that you utilized as being 1.5 times a day, because you can either use it for a half a day or a full day. And so you take the average of the 2. Matt came up, provides statistics, and on the busier times during the weekend, he's achieving 1.1 times a day. Well, if a reasonable target, and nobody's in the applicant's team has argued that 1.5 times a day is inappropriate. So you'd sit there and say, if you're only using it 1.1 times now, and 1.5 is reasonable, you've got a 36% built-in growth factor if you freeze. That's on the weekend. And if you look at the weekday, it's huge, the growth factor, because he's saying he's only using it 0.6 times a day. So there is opportunity for growth without providing any increase in the boat fleet. renters versus seasonal. That's irrelevant. We need to be focusing not on what the name or terminology is, but what the actual impact of usage is on the lake, and we've got that. It's 1.5 times a day for analysis purposes versus what he's actually achieving. And if you were to approve going to 20 boats, his Freedom boat capacity or for growth is like 257% growth. I mean, there hasn't been any discussion about my pent-up demand is so great, I need 20 boats today. It's what he's asking for. It's a target. And he's asking for it at a time when we don't know we know the South Basin is overcrowded in many areas, but we don't really have good data based on what's happening today. So it's important that we take that step back and we look, because we have a limited resource. And that resource is shared by many residents and many businesses throughout the lake. Just focusing here and wanting to allow for increased growth to Freedom Boat at the detriment of everybody else that uses the lake isn't, in my opinion, a good decision. We need to make informed decisions here, and we never got any pushback on our letters saying we're wrong, that the $1 million boat launch was included in the analysis. Pretty sure it wasn't. When you drill down as to how the grid was formed for the lake, there was no thought given to where the traffic was going. It was other than, all right, let's put it into bite-sized segments. And we'll just split the lake down the middle and take segments on each side. When everybody that I know, when you go out in your boat, you're going to go along the shore, unless you're going from point A to point B and you got to get there at a specific time. Then, if it's across lake, you're going to go across lake. You're going to go the shortest distance. Otherwise, you're going to take your time and you're going to look and see what's going on around you. That isn't reflected in the analysis. So, I would say that we should be tabling the request for the increase at this time. They have capacity to handle more business where they are. And I will have more comments when we get to the other aspect of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just 2 points on John's comments.
Anyone else in the audience? We'll get them all. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to speak? Carol?
Hi, Carol Collins, 35 Knox Road, Assembly Point. I have a couple of maps that I just wanted to show you that was submitted by the applicant, and it follows up on what John was just saying. Can I show you, can you this map so you can see what's going on?
You may approach the court.
I may approach the bench. I'll say the bench. If you look here, okay, so if you look at the applicant's picture, the map, if you hear Dunham's Bay and it goes to section 2, what they're suggesting the traffic pattern would be for the boaters to go from 2B around Diamond Island, go all the way up the west shore of the lake, come back down a little bit on the east side, but at 5B they're going to cross back over to the west side of the lake and come back around Diamond Island here. And the reason they did that, I think,
I'd like to address this before. That was for our tour boat permit. That is not suggesting that's how our boaters do. That was for a tour boat permit, so that's completely separate from our members. That's a different application.
Part of that? Okay, that's great. Okay, but since you have the map in front of you, Section 2B, and I discussed this with Joe
Where is it then?
back in October or November with Lorraine. Section 2B is a very large quadrat that mathematically, if you were to make that the size of 3D, you would have an overcrowded region. So 2B, and we could go into the mathematics, but I know Joe understands, is an overcrowded region. So what happens is people, when you go out of Dunham's Bay, you're already dumping into 2B, which is already overcrowded, into 3B, which is overcrowded, and then into 3G, 3F, which are all overcrowded. So the issue here isn't just Dunham's Bay. Dunham's Bay is fortunate with their 5-mile-an-hour zone. The people don't, with the next, as soon as they come out of Dunham's Bay, they go pretty fast. Matt, I'm sure you'll agree. They go alongside shore of Assembly Point, around through the channel, and off into the east side. So let's think about the whole lake in this regard. Okay, John said a few things that I was going to touch on, but okay. So back to the boating numbers. Dunham's, the 7,000 that we know, there were 7,000 launches based on what the invasive species information for launches is. We also know that it's probably more like 8,000 new boats that are launching out of Dunham's Bay. And I know that the Park Commission never expected to have this many boats come in out of that launch. I understand that because it's a game changer for Lake George. But we need to have that analyzed because we don't even know how many more boats are really coming into 2B in that pathway that I told you about, because they come right up along the shore and around. So I hopefully will consider that. I do have some questions. I don't understand why we would separate discussion of these two subjects. I don't know if you're going to vote on both at once or if you're going to wait till all the information is. Are you going to vote on one at a time?
We're going to vote on the whole. I just separated.
Okay.
Just for ease of discussion.
Just for ease of discussion. Okay. All right. Well, that's all I have to say then at this point.
Chris wanted to speak. Let somebody else go.
Good morning, Chris Nowitzki, Lake George Waterkeeper. My question is kind of directed to the Commission, and it's regarding the boat recreation study. Clearly, it was a planning document that was done to have some basis for decisions on applications that come forward. And when the information comes in that a bay is overcapacitated, that seems to be its limit. And now there's an application that shows numbers are going to increase that. So does the Commission have a precedent that bases their decisions that say if we have a bay that is exceeding capacity, then that's what it should be, and there should be no more. So I think that's my question. Similar to a variance, although we know legally it's not the same, you don't want to increase a nonconformity. Well, does the Commission want to increase overcapacity? So I think that's a question for you. Thanks.
Yeah, just off the cuff, Chris, I'll answer you and say again, we do pay attention to regulations, but at least in my case, the overriding factor in making a decision on something is common sense. Is this going to really be detrimental to the lake, or isn't it? Because there's lots of gray areas, around. You can't do things basically on statistics, because this is a big variable, really. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we do look at the facts, and we do have these tools, which we set up to help us make decisions. But eventually, at least I hope, most decisions are made on common sense of whether it's good for the lake or it isn't. At least that's my guess.
Thanks.
We haven't heard from the.
Good morning. My name is Lorraine Ruffing. I live on Assembly Point. What we've been talking about this morning is an area which is already over capacity. I frequently kayak in Dunham's Bay and back in the swamp, and due to the 5-mile-an-hour speed limit, it is a pretty safe area. However, most of the residents of Dunham's Bay will tell you that once the boats exit the bay, they gun it. I'm sure the residents of Joshua's Point would tell you, what kind of noise pollution, as well as a dangerous situation that causes. One of the factors that stood out for me is the fact that the boats that are planned for have horsepowers of 250 miles an hour. That can give you a pretty big whoosh when you're going along the shore. And in the family, we have had accidents in the lake, and there have been other more tragic accidents in our lake in terms of boat safety. My nephew was fishing in a rowboat 20 feet off of Assembly Point. One of these huge boats came down alongside him, knocked him out of the boat, continued on its trajectory down this side of Assembly Point. It was only the boat that was coming after that saw that he was in the water that picked him up and prevented a tragedy. So I think most of us on Assembly Point, we are concerned about boating safety and also overcapacity, density. And so what we would really request is that you postpone your decision and we look at the data for 2020 for the summer, and we actually see what is going on not only in Dunham's Bay but alongside Assembly Point, where most of the boats make their beeline. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet that wants to say something?
Good morning. My name is Barbara Sims. I'm a year-round resident on Dunham's Bay.
Speak up a little bit. Oh, okay. They might be able to hear you, but I can't.
My name is Barbara Sims. I'm a year-round resident on Dunham's Bay, and I believe you have some correspondence from my husband and myself regarding this issue. But I would just like to remind the commissioners of all the letters that I know you have received asking you not to increase the amount of rental boats at this facility. I appreciate Joe Thuen getting the information to us, which has been sent to the Dunham's Bay Association members. I guess the overriding word from Joe's response is overcapacity, and just please keep that in mind.
Okay. I think you want to get back up. Everybody's had a chance to speak.
That's it? Okay.
Hey, one follow-up if I could. But,
sure. Yeah, you could.
All right, this will be fast. So, Matt has provided materials. My name's John Collins again. Yeah. Matt has provided materials talking about, we meaning Freedom, as safe boat operators. You go through a training program, and therefore his clients are going to be good operators. They're not. They're less likely to create more danger. The problem with that is others on the lake are not good drivers. And when you add more boats, you're taking up more acreage, you're compressing the lake and still raising the potential for accidents, because the poor boat operators are going to have less space to operate in. So to just think of this as, well, we have good operators, let's give the expansion, this is a good thing, it really isn't. Again, because we're in such an overcrowded situation, and even if Matt's clients aren't the ones that are creating the problem is still out there, and we're exacerbating it. Thank you.
Matt O'Hara, again, the applicant. Just a couple of John's earlier points. The one was taking a look at displacing seasonal boats, and those boats will go somewhere, so they will remain on the lake. I think the converse of that might be more true, that if you take our 84 members who aren't sharing these boats, those 84 groups of people are going to go find boats to use. So how are they going to boat? Are they going to go rent boats? Are they going to buy boats? They're still probably going to be on the lake. So if you want to look at the lake as a whole and not just the bay, I think it's important to consider that these people are going to find a way to be on the lake. If that's the concern, is the overcrowding of the lake. I would suggest they're not just going to give up boating. So maybe now they are on the lake and they're less trained and they're renting boats somewhere. I think both sides of that argument are important to look at. When he talks about growth, and we have room for growth because we factored in 1.5 trips, our business does not make money the more people go out. We prefer people that use the boats less. The less they go out, the less hours. They're paying a fixed monthly fee regardless of how much they use the boat. So whether the boat sits there unused or whether it goes out 10 times a day, they're paying the same thing. Obviously, it can't go out 10 times a day. But when you're talking about our growth and our hardship, our growth does not come from the boats being used more. Our business does better the less they get used, actually, because people are paying a fixed amount. So there's really no growth built in from that spread of being used every other weekday and being used 1.1 times a weekend up to that 1.5. That's just not the business model. And again, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the business model is, and that's what a lot of the misconception is. I mentioned Carol, so we did a tour boat permit because we needed that to do things like a Big Brothers Big Sister Day on the water. You have to have a public vessel license to do any of those charitable things. So that's what that tour boat map was. That's not what our members do. That's just what our tour boat route is. So that's not really relevant to our membership. With the horsepower of the boats, 1 out of the 12 had 250 horsepower this year. Most of them are 150. There's a couple 200. We actually are hoping to add our first electric boat this year, and that's a space we want to grow into. Electric boats are zero emissions, zero pollution, quiet. They don't go any faster than the no limit speed zone anyway. So there's no whoosh. So as we grow, electric boats are going to be part of our fleet, probably in a more significant way than anything with 250 horsepower on it. So when you're looking at the type of boats, we're happy to look at that too. And the 250 is kind of a rarity in our fleet. That's not the norm in any way. And I want to make sure it wasn't one of our members that caused that accident, correct?
No idea.
Okay, I don't think. Well, I just wanted to clarify that you weren't saying it was. Okay.
It didn't stop.
I think that is what I have for right now. Thank you.
Very good. Sir.
My name is Len Sims, also a resident on Dunham's Bay. One quick comment. I really have no argument with what Matt is doing, proposing, or has done. He's been a model Dunham's Bayer, in my opinion. I have a bone to pick with you, and I think that's what I'm hearing from our Assembly Point neighbors and Chris. The issue is capacity. And we've been talking about this in terms of the 5 mile per hour zone for a long time. We've been dealing with it for 25 years as a Dunham's Bay Association. And regardless of what you do here today, the problems are not going to go away in Dunham's Bay in terms of capacity and overuse. And the obvious sore point for me is that there's very little patrolling in our bay. The presence there is real good about noontime on a Wednesday, when I'm the only one in the bay, it seems like. But unfortunately, I know Lorraine are out nice and early in the morning. Join us sometime midday on a sunny day, and you aren't safe in Dunham's Bay. And the speed limits are not observed regularly, except by Matt's boats. They're the exception because they're being reminded and they're being cautioned. So I turn it back on you to look at capacity and the monitoring of that capacity and the control of it. Thank you.
Anyone else to speak on this right now? Commissioners want to ask anybody that has spoke for any questions at this point before we move on to the other half of the application.
Yeah, I have a question, Bruce.
Good.
Looking to, I'm neutral gender here right now, but I'm recalling my limited memories of Dunham's Bay, and back when the Howards ran Dunham's Bay Sea Ray, a very successful dealership. And what reminded me of it was I'm looking at an aerial photo of the docks. I know there's been a big revision of the docks up there, a big reduction of the dockage at Dunham's Bay Marina after the Howards left the marina or whenever. There used to be more docks there, I believe, right?
Molly left. Is that true, Matt? I don't think there's been a change in the configuration of the dockage.
The biggest change would be that it used to be under the roof, so maybe it looked...
Maybe it just...
Right, yeah, so it looks like less intrusive.
Well, my guess is, and I understand and fully appreciate your attitudes, everybody that lives on the bay, were these issues that we're talking about in front of us the same issues that actually existed when Roger and Karen ran Dunham's Bay and had an active gas sales and active service sales, active boat renters, occupants, and numerous test drives in and out of the bay? Were all of these problems in existence on those days? And I'm directly asking the Dunham's Bay witnesses because you're the ones that see it out your front window.
Carol?
Okay, I've lived there all my life. You know, I literally grew up with Georgie Pencil when the father owned that. So I knew it from when the Pencils had it to Karen Howard and forward. The difference is there's more people, there's more congestion, there's less experience. People don't start off with a rowboat like they used to and go on up and gather experience driving. Now people start with a 25-foot Sea Ray with a 200 horsepower and go. There's one speed on Lake George and it's throttled down. And I really mean this. This is what happens when you looked at this. Like Phil, when we used to water ski in Lake George, it was a different lake. There wasn't as many boats on it. So we don't see very much patrol in that sector of the lake, and I think it's because there is a lot of attention that needs to be put in Log Bay and all these other spaces, and so they do it there. We have tour boats and ski boats that come in there, and the tubing, I think, is the biggest difference. Every one of the pontoon boats are pulling a tuber. They've got 12. Pontoon boats can have 10 to 13, and correct me, madam, but 10 to 13 seats in it. And they usually show up full. I mean, you're going to do this, you're going to pay the money, you're going to go take your friends and neighbors. And so their tubing, that's become a much more expansive thing. Tubing requires something like 15 to 40 acres to safely tube. Okay, so when you're talking about 3 acres and all these other numbers, you've got to think about what these boats are doing. And there's a big difference now in what people are doing on the lake, the size of the boats and motors. So Dunham's Bay has changed. In front of Assembly Point has changed dramatically. So it's different now. We need to pay attention.
Bill, you wanted to respond to my question.
Yeah, that was a good question, actually. And, thinking back to when we were water skiing and it was bad, it really was congested and scary. So, yeah, we got the 5 mile an hour limit. So now that I'm hearing the folks from Assembly Point, well, yeah, okay, you guys in Dunham's Bay have the 5 mile an hour limit. Things are a lot safer. They seem less congested. Okay, you go out beyond the buoys. What's happening out there? Very good point. You get people pulling a tube. How does a tuber use the lake? They pull around, they do figure eights, they get people going over the bumps and stuff. I do that with my kids, and you're right. You want a lot of space for that. So that's different. If you move ahead a little bit from the time frame when I was a kid until the 5 mile an hour thing, and when Karen and Roger had it, a lot of their focus was on big cabin cruisers. That's what they like to sell. Well, they sell anything, of course, but the smaller boats were likely somebody, a resident or somebody trailering. But the folks that were at the marina were these big cruisers. Now, to my mind, it was in some ways sort of sad that folks would earn the money to buy these big cruisers and then they'd just sit there. Because you could be there on July 4th weekend and these things would still be all just sitting there. I think I don't know whether it was Roger or somebody said, well, what we sell here is the dream that you're going to go out on the lake. And the boats just sat there largely. And when they did go out, we were in the 5 mile an hour limit. They'd go out slowly, maybe get out to an island. I don't know what they were doing, but there wasn't a tremendous amount of traffic from them. With this new model, we'll say the Freedom Boat model, you're going to have 1.1 per day per boat all the time. Not this come up to my cruiser, put out the bay, stay out for a week, or maybe come back that day. I don't know. But it's a different usage. It's more intensive than what we saw with Karen and Howard. And yes, there's still a Karen and Roger Howard, I should say. Yes, it's more intensive. Yes, the gas stock is still there. I'm sure they hope to sell lots of gas, just like Karen and Roger did. So it's more intensive, is what's projected.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just if I could a quick point. We don't have the ability to track boat congestion at any given day at any given time, but what we do track, the only lake in New York State, one of the few in the country, is actual boat registrations on Lake George. The high of boat registrations on Lake George was 2002, slightly less than 2003, and then it took a dip in the economic downturn, slowly been recovering, but we haven't reached that peak of 16,500 boats back in 2002. Last year, I'm waiting for the number from Erica, but we're somewhere around 15,000. So I just want to throw that out there. It doesn't impact the conversation specific to Dunham's Bay, but we are not historically continually increasing boat registrations on Lake George. And I can share that graph with anybody. I shared it a few years back, but just for everybody's edification, it's remained largely steady over at least the last 20, if not 25 years.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just to your point, which I agree was a good question, in the letter I sent you, I used some counts about boats going in and out of the bay on a high. I chose, obviously, high summer weekend when there was a lot of activity, and I taped it and then sat there and counted those boats. And I don't have those figures at my fingertips now, but that was done when the marina was there, when the Howards were there, maybe a decade ago. I repeated the same process this past summer, and there definitely is an increase in the traffic in and out of the bay. Whether it's all Freedom is another question, because I didn't differentiate. It feels very similar to what the projections are, a small incremental increase. Quite frankly, I think it has remained pretty much the same, except that the Freedom Boat people have one thing, either to their advantage or disadvantage. The boats are all similarly colored and very recognizable. So anybody who commits an offense, we know where to go.
Just jokingly, but not jokingly, there's a black Bennington with an outboard that comes in, flying in and out, that looks like ours, but isn't ours. Just to clarify that.
I
He's the
understand.
troublemaker.
It's very recognizable. But the activity from the Freedom Boat people, again, I will say my argument isn't with Matt. He's done a good job. They're primarily in pontoon boats, and they leave very little weight, which is unlike many of the larger boats that don't observe going in for gas and so forth. They get kind of anxious. It's a long 5 mile per hour, and they can throttle up well over the 5, not planing, but well over the 5 miles an hour, which throws tremendous weights. So I would say to your point, yes, it has not diminished since the Howards were there. It has increased incrementally. A lot of that is I don't wear a watch at home anymore because I go around noon. And, early in the morning, around noon, and then later in the afternoon. The Freedom Boat people on their half day or full day use come in and out. But they are not creating problems in and of themselves. Those problems were there.
Could I ask a question? Could I ask a question? Yes.
Who do you want to ask?
I would like to ask Matt.
Okay.
Matt, my question is this. At 0.6 trips a week and 1.1 trips on a weekend, are all of your boats out of their berths for the club members on the lake?
No, so basically, out of the 12 boats this past year, on any given weekday, about 6 to 7 would be out on the lake. And on the weekend, 12 boats would do about 14 trips. So 2 of them would come back and forth. The other 10 would just be out once. But similarly, I'd say all the seasonal boats in our marina on a Saturday, if it's nice in the summer, whoever has a slip on the lake is out. So a slight increase compared to a seasonal boat on the weekend. 12 boats doing 14 trips instead of 12 boats doing 12 trips.
Have you had to tell your members that we don't have enough boats, so you can't go out?
Yeah, typically on the weekends there's a wait list, and there are usually a handful of people that do not go out that want boats on the weekends. Yes, there are people that, if we had boats available, would potentially be using them.
But during the week, you don't have that problem?
No, during the week we generally have about half the boats available for use for the moment if someone called up and wanted a boat.
Thank you.
One point I'd like to make is that on August 12, 2015, Governor Cuomo opened up $1 Million Beach. So our study in 2016 will include $1 Million Beach being open.
No, because it was actually completed in 2015.
Yes, he said he opened it.
The study collected data from...
It says here he announced opening the Lake George boat launch.
That was on August 14th of that year.
2015.
Right. So that didn't include the study.
The study was done in July, wasn't it? 2015?
16.
So
15.
The report is dated 2016. The data came from 2015.
Right.
So we missed the bulk of the summer. And although I don't know what dates they did. I think there were some days in August for the peak day. Right, so that would have been after the.
It was after the study. I spoke with and did those studies that year. With my husband and I too. So we know we did it the 2 July dates and 2 August dates in the beginning of August. So it was completed at that time.
Yes, it was.
I don't mean to argue, but it's really important to the lake.
Okay, can we move on now? Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just kind of, my understanding is you want to shut down this and move to the next.
Part 2, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Part 2 is amendment to the wharf configuration. What is currently there now is depicted up top on the drawing by Finney Design. I think everybody's been past the property knows exactly what it is. There actually is a small section of deck and porch that there's currently a gap in the roof. And if you have been inside the building, I would argue that the roof isn't really holding anything back now anyways, as it's fairly porous at this point in time. What we're proposing is taking the final lowest elevation of the roof and keeping that height, putting a railing there and opening it up with the slight little roof against the existing structure, so you have a complete open deck over the facility. Total elevation is no higher over the mean high and low water mark. The very end, again, is at the same height of the edge of the existing roof, so we're not gaining height, we're not changing anything from that standpoint. The commercial use that is going on within the structure and on that section specifically is changing. Before it was commercial as it related to the marina business. What is being proposed and what was approved by the town of Queensbury is an aspect and a function of the boat club and a benefit for the boat club members. It's essentially a private restaurant that is available to the members when it is open for either coming and going, or whenever they feel the need or the desire to utilize the restaurant. It is not open to the public. It is only for members, and I think Finney did a good job on the design work, and it's actually going to certainly be an improvement over what is existing. The commissioners all have copies of the various approvals that was required by the town of Queensbury. There was septic, there was site plan, there were special use permits. All of those permits were obtained through the town and granted, and what you see is the current version of that proposal.
Before we go any further, I would like to ask staff and council for a confirmation. Do we at any point get involved in use on the lake? Normally we're just involved in structures. In other words, are we involved at all in usage? In other words, somebody wants to put a bar on a lake, or somebody wants to put a restaurant on a lake. What business we have? To the best of my knowledge, we haven't been involved in usage.
Not since I've been counsel. I'm not sure.
So Joe has some history with it.
Yeah, there's on record as a application by the Dockside Landing around 2010, I believe, which is somewhat similar in that they wanted to take what was a pre-existing peaked roof boathouse, which over time transformed to a flat roof boathouse without a sun deck. That was collapsed by snow. They came in for an application for a new sun deck in the same footprint to facilitate restaurant use at Dockside Landing in the town of Hague. It didn't come to the board, but Mike White, executive director at the time, wrote a letter, and there's a subsequent letter to the applicant saying this is a non-water dependent use, and so we can't authorize it. As a dock modification, if you want to appeal to the commission, you're welcome to do so. So in that case, he did speak to the use of the dock having to be water dependent. I pointed out in the record that this is slightly different, and that we've always had this second story commercial use over the waters of the lake where that didn't exist at Dockside. It was just simply a roof. It wasn't walking space, it wasn't floor space. So what we're seeing here is a conversion from existing commercial floor space to proposed commercial floor space, but just a change in use of exactly how that's used. But yeah, it does get into more of a planning board type purview, and certainly a good question.
To the best of my knowledge, 25 years of experience here, that there's really no language that allows the park commission to consider what kind of usage could be made in the property other than they're given marina permits and so forth. In other words, if you were going to put in a taco stand or a restaurant or something, you need local government permits and you need state permits, but the park commission doesn't get involved in what you use a piece of property for.
And to your point, if they weren't coming in for the dock modification, this wouldn't be before. If they just wanted to change the inside of the structure and change the use, we wouldn't have any jurisdiction. It's just the dock modification aspect that.
And the reason I bring this this up. I know people are, from the letters I've read, are concerned that, there's going to be a full-blown bar with boom boxes and beer and all that stuff served there. And to the best of my knowledge, we can't grant that, or we can't stop it. We can tell him what he can build out there.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have planning board approvals and all.
Correct.
Yeah. I just bring this up because I know people are concerned about what the usage is going to be, and they're coming to us looking for a remedy. If they're coming to us looking for a remedy to a potential problem out there, I don't think we have the authority to do it. I'm just saying that before this whole argument starts.
I appreciate it.
I think, like, from reading the stuff that I read about it, the concerns probably over there was noise.
And that's not something that is the commission would be looking at. I mean, that's all local approvals. And it sounds like they have their local approvals.
Yeah. Do you have any more you want to
No, just where possible, I always agree with the commissioners and the chairman specifically. All the approvals were properly obtained. If you do look around the lake, you'll notice there are a lot of, the sagamore. You can look around the lake and find instances where there are commercial uses that are approved by the municipalities. They may kind of spill out into boat decks. Boats by George has flat roofs on some of their marinas where people can hang out. And again, I would agree in that you're looking at the structure. The town of Queensbury also looked at the structure and the use, but what is before this board right now is the structure itself, the wharf modification, and we obviously believe it's going to be a tremendous improvement to what is presently there.
You want to add?
Well, this is probably more for the neighbors than for you guys, but just to clarify, I know we're using the word bar and restaurant. We're not getting a liquor license. There's no commercial kitchen. It's a clubhouse for members. We're not going to have bartenders slinging margaritas across the deck. So I know a lot of the concerns are related to bar, restaurant. Again, it's a verbiage thing. It's a clubhouse area for members to spend some time before after boats, and it is not a commercial restaurant. So.
Is he applying for a restaurant? You don't know?
I should have struck. The commissioners should disregard that because you're not involved in usage.
Thanks, Bruce.
Hi, my name is Kate McCarthy. I am a resident of Dunham's Bay. I'm probably halfway between Freedom Boat Company and the 5 Mile an Hour buoys. So my concern or my question back to you regarding Lake George Park Commission having any say in this, maybe legally you don't, but I think in your own words you recognize the citizens of the lake and their concerns, and the noise is a concern. To us, the unknown aspects of the noise that could happen. They haven't applied for a liquor license, but that could happen when they applied for their permit to be established as this boat club. We didn't know about all of this. We didn't know about the open club. So all of these kind of things keep happening, and we're just trying to understand fully. I fully support Freedom Boat Company and Matt. I think he is a good steward of this lake. I would prefer to have people that have been trained by someone who is concerned about the lake with their boats than someone who has not been, properly educated. Matt is happy to address any concerns we have. But so back to being a citizen of this lake, the noise is a concern. Right now we grow up and you can hear grandkids asking for pancakes at 6 a.m. It's so quiet. You can hear the dog bark. You have to quiet your dog, barking late at night. So I can imagine this being a fabulous place for people to come and join and stay. And people maybe not using the boat, members could come and sit there. So it's a great sunset. I applaud Matt for giving his members a place to enjoy with their membership. I am against a restaurant bar design. I have a hard time believing it's not going to progress to that. I would suggest that maybe there's a middle ground, that this is a club, that there's grills out, that there's a limit to social events. You know, Matt has talked about this being a place for social things to happen. So that changes. That's not just club members. Now we're having parties. Now we're doing different things. This is their own verbiage. But I get that there should be a club house, showers, a place to stop, drop your stuff, relax for 2 minutes, not just get off the boat and go to your car. I'm all for that. I just do have a problem with this whole bar restaurant design. As much as Matt's telling us we're not applying for an alcohol license yet. I, again, will finish that I think it's a fabulous design. I think our bay, you know, really gets a lot from this restoration. Matt has gone over and above, and Finney Group has done a great job. So, again, that would be my noise, and back to Lake George Park Commission, taking into concern the citizens of the lake and its effect on the lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any further comments?
Yeah. Phil Mitchell again. Parcel 239.20-1-10 is property we have. When we talked about usage of rental usage, you said this board would have to approve rental usage. And when we talk about usage as a bar restaurant, you said this board had no jurisdiction. I don't understand. That's probably the truth, and that's okay.
I would say, sir, the state had in mind that boats go out on the water. The dock is not going to go out on the water. Okay. Now let's go back to what's cast in concrete. You say you do have some idea of what's jurisdiction over what structures get built. What structures get built do have an impact over what usages they have. You build I don't know. But anyway, you build a bar restaurant, it's going to get used as a bar restaurant. That's what's cast in concrete. One day down the road, Matt may not be there. There may be somebody else using it. You say there's no liquor license. Okay, but it is going to be used for functions. What's to stop somebody from using it as a wedding pavilion and bringing in contract bartender service? Nothing. This facility, which will attract at one point or another people having a great time late into the evening, is 400 feet from the sleeping porch that I use. I've been there since I was 9 years old. And I'd love to have my grandkids come out there and bundle up in a sleeping bag like we always used to, and still do from time to time, a lot of time. And that's going to be 400 feet away from that usage. And that's not counting the deck that my neighbor has that's 50 feet closer, and the deck that the neighbor to them have is 50 feet closer to that. It's not like it's just one place. It's 18 tables. That's like an increase of 18 over 70, whatever that is, 35% more people outside, more noise pollution than what we have today. It's huge. Noise travels over the lake. Well, you all know. You're all around the lake. If this was in your backyard, you wouldn't want a restaurant in your backyard. Come on. And that's what it's going to sound like to everybody on the bay. And you do have the power to not let this construction go. And you said yourself that you work on common sense more than anything else. Common sense is what my complaint is about. I didn't have any numbers to
go about congestion or parking or anything like that. But common sense tells me if you put in a place that's going to have capacity for 80 to 100 people, you're going to have a lot of cars there. That's in addition to the cars that are there for members. Where's all that traffic going to go? People come bombing around that corner on 9L. Used to be they'd be getting drunk down in the village, and there'd be crashes in around that corner. We'd hear them at night and go take a look and maybe help people out. Now with the drinking and driving laws, there's not as many crashes, thank goodness. But now you've got this attractive thing right here, right on the corner. All kinds of cars are going to be there. The only way to get parking is for people parking on 9L, or maybe they could set up valet parking, I don't know, and park the cars up in the woods where they own property, and then you have the valet coming across, back and forth across the street at all hours. It's not a good usage. It's not something that should be in the Bay. The Bay is a quiet place. Not anymore. 80 people out on the deck. Is that quiet? No. Furthermore, while it does look attractive, I'll give the Finney design folks that. When you come back after a day of boating, or if it rains out and you've rented a boat and the clouds burst open, where do you want to be? Do you want to be on an outdoor party deck? Heck no. You want to seek some cover. So why don't they dock their boats back there and go under the existing roof with the views of the lake still and be out of the rain? Come on. Do something that makes sense. If you want to put a deck out this end to show that there's a facility there, or open up this end with windows to show that there's tables in there, go ahead. But keep that mess inside. Don't make everybody have to listen to it. I guess that's all I have to say. I mean, I could go back in history and talk about growing up on the lake and the love we have for it and why it is here. I'm standing talking in front of people when I really kind of hate to do that sort of stuff. Come on. Help us out here, will you? Please, don't allow this. Please, I beg you.
Sir?
Hi, Ed Anchor with Finney Design Group. I just wanted to point out a couple of points with the current design, the way it stands right now. Originally, the design that we came up with was an enclosed use out over the lake. The town of Queensbury disallowed that as part of the plan, so we kind of dropped back to an open-air deck on the lake. The current structure as it exists, with evaluation by a structural engineer, is not suitable for any level of capacity of people. So we have to build that structure back up and replace the structure that is there in order to be able to have a use on that structure to begin with. So it's not really safe in its current capacity. So that's part of the rationale to redesign that space, not only be in conjunction with the town of Queensbury, but also to make it safe for occupancy. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I'm confused again. The application I'm reading says the applicant seeks to modify an existing boathouse from a peak roof to a sun deck. Where did we get to 80 people in a bar and a restaurant and bartenders, and wedding receptions, and mucho cars on the road? I was here during the meeting, and I'm just, how did all that part of the conversation go on?
Assumptions.
Okay.
The application is merely to modify the boathouse. It isn't for anything else.
I understand that.
Yeah, and all of these, all of the arguments.
We're listening to well-placed, passionate arguments about something that, A, we don't have any power to control. I appreciate your concerns. Living on the lake, I would have the exact same concerns, but if they don't exist, it's unfair to burden us with the issue that they might exist when we don't even have jurisdiction over it. It's a town of Queensbury issue. Go see John Stroud.
If you extend this to private individual, puts a sun deck on it, we don't ask him what he's going to use the sun deck for. It's just a point. Where do you draw the line here on what a person wants to do with their property? The question before the commission, and the only application before us is a structure. And whether or not it's a legal structure under our laws, and if it gets to a situation in the future where it's something else has happened, something else, there's a bar going on, there's a jazz concert there or whatever, that's not in the application, and that becomes the problem. We can't predict in the future what everybody's going to do with their property. When we look at a piece of property, all we can do when we look at a piece of property is go by what the rules and the laws say. And I did say common sense. Well, common sense tells me I can't predict and sit here as a czar and say, well, I think this person might use this property for this in the future. I can't sit here and say that. This person has not, I'm not asking you to get up yet, this person has not asked for a permit to operate an outdoor bar, an outdoor kitchen, or anything else. He's asked to modify his structure. And that's all we're going to look at today. Period. Yes.
I apologize for addressing this board with stuff they have no control over. Not quite. I'm sorry I missed the opportunities to. I'm sorry I missed the opportunities to approach the town of Queensbury with this debacle. But oh well.
I can understand your passion, sir. There isn't a person in this room, if his neighbor starts digging a hole any place, that isn't going to be concerned with what the hell he's going to do with it.
I totally agree with your argument. I'm just telling you, I totally agree with his argument, but it's not our argument. That's why I want to be clear on it.
Mr. Chairman?
You like to say something?
I'm going to muddy the water a little bit, because it seems to me that the only reason that we ever approved Sundex...
Speak up, sir. Go over your phone.
The only reason that we ever approved Sundex is because they're actually roofs over boats. That we don't approve structures unless they have a function dealing with the boat, the dock, and particularly with the boat. The existing structure seems to be an illegal structure from that standpoint because it's over the water and it's not doing anything for the boats underneath it, really. And they're asking to modify it. And I wouldn't think that we could approve anything except the removal of it without a long discussion. And I don't know whether that means talking about use or not. I'm going to put the attorney on the spot. Am I right that we shouldn't even be approving this because it's an illegal structure? It's not doing anything for the boats?
That's the first I've heard of that argument, Commissioner.
Well, it just came to me.
Right, I don't know. I didn't think of this project like that.
And I didn't bring the policy or the prior record of determination on this, but that goes back to grandfather docks. And there is a policy in a record decision that says grandfather docks that don't meet the regulations but predated the regulations are allowed to remain in kind or be replaced in kind as long as any modification doesn't exacerbate their noncompliance. So in this instance, physically, the footprint's not getting bigger, the height's not getting higher. So if it were, then we'd be requesting a variance. The applicant would be requesting a variance. So this is not, this is before you only because of the uniqueness of the use in that prior Hague decision that didn't come to the board, not for anything needing a variance from the physical design from that grandfathered structure.
I could just follow up on...
In keeping with our established way of operating, you see, this has gotten away from it big time because I feel we should allow people to say what they say. I'll accept one more comment from you. I'm sure you want to rebut something.
Actually, no. I'm just going to piggyback.
Everybody else, but at that point, when the commissioners start discussing the question, there's no more input because you may not agree with some things we say, or you may want to stand up and cheer. I never heard anybody do that, but so have that.
Yeah, indeed. I just wanted to follow up on something that Joe said because I know he spoke at length about this with Matt Fuller in my office. There is a approval on record from 1981 relative to what's existing there. And in terms of the length over the water, we actually are pulling it back. It may be ever so slightly, but it is a slight reduction. We were very cautious not to do anything that would increase the height or increase the distance out into the lake when we were originally designing the modification. Thank you.
Okay. Gentlemen, I have one question for the commissioners. Do you want to discuss this project as a whole, or do you want to break it down like we did in the discussion? It's your choice. We broke it down into, first we discussed the number of boats, and next we discussed the building. Or do you just want to spout out on both as we go around? Because eventually you have the option, with the concurrence of the applicant, of approving certain portions of this and not the other. And that's a question before we even start to talk. I'm going to ask the applicant if we want to approve, say, the increase in boats, but not the structure, or the structure but not the increase in boats. In other words, if we want to modify your application, are you agreeable to it? Or do you want us to consider it as a whole? It's the whole thing or nothing?
Looks like maybe like a minute to talk.
The ball's in your court. You want to talk with him? Please. I'll give you a 5-minute recess while you talk. No, we're on a 5-minute recess. We're reconvened, and we're back to where you were about to say something.
I was. I thank the commissioners. Before I give you my answer, which I think you're going to know what it is, I just want to highlight the fact that we have had a long conversation about congestion. But I guess I would argue is that my client's proposal is the solution. It may not seem like it now, but this is the direction things are headed. The boats aren't coming in and out of the water. You're not increasing the burden on boat launches or Million Dollar Beach or any other boat launch around the lake. There's a finite number of boats that Lake George can handle, and there's a finite number of boats that are available at this property. We're reducing that number, and I'll leave it to you guys to discuss the application. And respectfully, my client is okay if you handle the approval separately. My only request and caution is if it's a question of needing more information, I'd happily respond. If it is something that, obviously we can provide that's out there, that's something that can be generated. And then, to the extent we need to come back tomorrow, 2 months from now, we can have that conversation later. But, we're not going to disagree with you if you want to handle the two proposals separately.
Yeah, I always offer the applicant a choice. However, I still reserve the right to say that the commission can approve a project in any way they want.
Understood.
Partially, but I would rather that the applicant was aware of the fact that we might be thinking of approving part of this and not the other part.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Carol, do you have something new to add?
Yes.
Okay.
I understand just now that there was a late addition to the stormwater plans, and I was just beginning to discuss it. Joe didn't have a chance to send it out, but I had questions about the stormwater plan to begin with anyway. So that's new, right? Can we talk about that?
Do we have a new addition to the stormwater plan for this modification to the building?
I had requested some clarification on the design. They provided some updated plans that didn't, in my opinion, substantially change anything, just kind of clarified. They did increase the size of the dry well. So it was received prior to after the last submission, so I didn't update the file, update the record. The current permit condition says you shall work with staff to retrofit the site for stormwater management to the greatest extent practicable. So it seemed like they were meeting that intent, and the commissioners had an idea of what they wanted to do, so I didn't update
When did
the
this
latest
modification or clarification take place?
It would have been within the last week or so.
was relatively recent. With
the last 3 weeks?
Within the last week or so, it was.
And why is it coming up now?
Carol had a question about what's going on with stormwater.
Okay.
So I'll try to summarize. The applicant can jump in if they want. The building drains.
In other words, it's not something new that's been presented by the applicant during this meeting.
Correct.
Because if it is, we're not going to talk about it.
Correct. This is an effort to retrofit the site to improve water quality resulting from existing stormwater.
Go ahead.
Okay. My concern is the soil type that's there. I did the thing that you can do on the national site where you can look at the soil types, you can look at the Warren County soils and all that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but these are Charlton soils, so people are familiar with that. They have a very high hydraulic conductivity, which means water will go through it really quickly, and they're sort of like a good spot for like everything, but you don't want water to go through too fast and too slow. So really concerned about the time that it takes to do that. This is something you would have to test, and sometimes they do these things where you test before construction. I would think that this board, being stormwater is so important, would want to know if these soils are suitable for these for a catchment basin. I think that at one point, don't know now, the stormwater thing was undersized. What I don't know what new or what's old, and it said that a lot of the overflow would go right onto the road. So I think it'd be hard to capture all of this and do a good job of it. So I would like to know more about that, but I also think that it's very important to know the ability of these soils before you grant any permits. It's stormwater, that's what we're about, and lake. So
thank you.
That.
Joe, did Queensbury, they have jurisdiction on stormwater here, right?
They're number 4.
Yes. They administer the commission's stormwater.
They approve the stormwater plan.
Yeah, we've been trying to work with each marina owner on these old sites. We've been trying to work at the staff level at the commission, even where we don't have expressed stormwater jurisdiction, to help improve some of these marina sites as we work with them. It's a lot of impervious, they're small sites, there's a lot of development, and just try to come away with some best management practices that will improve overall water quality. So there's no set standard on volume or quality, but instead of, right now it all runs off the roof, hits pavement, hits whatever's on the pavement, and runs to the lake. What they've presented is guttering the existing or proposed clubhouse building, the entirety of that, and putting it into dry well. We reviewed that. We asked for an increase in the size of the dry well, and in our opinion, it was a good effort by the applicant, and given the tough site conditions, might be one of the only options for treating stormwater. So, again, it's just trying to get some betterments at these sites where we have the leverage to do so.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, there's no requirements that the applicant do stormwater at all. But what we've been doing is systematically going around the lake, meeting with every marina, and saying before your next 5-year marina permit, you shall retrofit this property to your maximum extent practicable. So we thought with this applicant, you're working on the property anyway. Let's see what we can do best at the property for stormwater management. There's no requirement under our stormwater regs, but before they get their marina permit, here's what we want you to do. And the applicant was amenable to that. So they're doing the best they can. Joe's been reviewing the plans and said this is the best that we think they can do at this difficult site.
So, in other words, there's a quasi-approval of what they're trying to do from our side.
Right. But it's not a stormwater permit per se.
It's not
We're
a
asking
stormwater
them
permit.
to be good neighbors and do better with their application.
So the basic law does not require them to do a stormwater permit.
On this project, it doesn't.
On this project, it doesn't, but we asked for it and got their best estimation of what they could do.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. You're at the very end, Chris. I'll give you one more shot.
Thank you. And I would have tried to speak. I didn't know that you were going right in. But on the stormwater, I completely agree. And we've worked with the applicant. We provided a grant for him to put in a new holding tank. So that is new. They're working on a dry well, which is a practice. I think there could be improvement. Maybe that's something that can be brought in. Here's some algae photos that we have from outside the marina. We've been monitoring algae in Dunham's Bay. So again, I think with Carol's point, these soils may not have the best treatment potential. Can we work in a rain planter so when water comes off of the roof, through the gutter, through a planter along the building to get some more treatment removal before it goes into the ground, I think would be good. We'd be glad, and we've mentioned this to Matt. I think anything we can do to get rid of these algae blooms would be good, and that's it. So if stormwater can be part of a condition, if there are approvals, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the algae bloom, you realize that the head of the Jefferson Project stood in this very same room and says, no matter where the algae bloom is sitting, we have absolutely no way of finding out where it came from just because it's sitting in front of something. In other words, if you're trying to say the algae bloom has something to do with Dunham's Bay Marina, there's no proof of that. You were here that day that he said, as a matter of fact, one of our commissioners asked him, can you determine from the algae bloom where it came from? And he said, no, we have no way of doing it. Right?
I agree with that, but I also know that if you don't handle stormwater,
I understand.
You can't say that it's not there either.
Okay.
So,
But,
thank you.
But as far as that goes, when you look at the position of that bay and the way the prevailing winds go either north or south, it's going to be hard for whatever's coming from the south to kind of come around and, get way down in there to the end of the bay, and even coming from the other direction too, because it's so remote in there. I mean, it would be tough for me to use that theory right there.
Thank you. Let's get off the algae blooms right now.
No, well,
Yeah, but don't
I think the algae blooms are. I know, but personally speaking, that hits a real sore
It is a
spot
problem,
for
but
me.
it's not what we're here to decide today.
I know that.
You pay for that. Joe, as chairman of the Project Review Committee, I would like you to start off with comments because we're going to discuss the project now. That's probably been before us for the last hour and a half.
Okay, we definitely visited the site. I think, to make it brief, my view is that Dave Wake stated that an important fact that the boats are not increasing on the lake. Boat registrations are about the same, a little less than 2003. Second point is that we're reducing boats that are leased or that are paying their 14, and that's drivers that we have no control over, replacing them with 8 rentals that have good education. And everybody is agreeing in this meeting that Matt is a good steward of the lake. So, in my view, I think that this is a good project, and I'm in favor of it. And as far as the building goes, I think that we walk around in the building and everything, and I think that they're doing a good job there. And so I'm in favor of it.
Thank you. Mark?
I had a lot of points to make, but I forgot most of them. But one of the things that I'll point out is that navigable water is probably the most public place. It's the use of the water is for the public, the people of the state and New York State, the usage and the congestion can be a function of transient boaters or just boaters coming in and go to bay from elsewhere. The two recreational studies can be a trend then the 2005-2015 trend is that there's a reduction of boats in the bay. And that was part of the application analysis that was done. More acreage per boat. Those are snapshots for the most part of the period. But that's the data that is presented. So overall, I think that the perception, as Joe spoke about, would be not noticeable from this application, perception and suggestion. It can be swallowed up by a few extra votes.
Should be talking to us.
Where other voters come from. And so I would tend to side with the approval of this application.
Yeah, just in the future, I'm not going to pick on you particularly, Mark, but when we, I can? Okay, when we go around a table like this and I ask you a question, I'd prefer you to talk to the commissioners and not the audience. Okay?
He's running for office.
Running away from office.
I know you're not running for office. Dean.
Last year we approved 12 boats, 12 vessels on those docks, as opposed to 20 because of congestion. I don't see anything's changed, quite frankly. I've looked at Downers Bay pretty well. It certainly is badly congested. I mean, 3 acres a boat, that's, 5 times less than what we think is an average acreage for the space a boat needs. I can really sympathize with the people who live there and are concerned with that congestion. And in the North Country, we call this a death by 1,000 cuts, when you do little bits here and there and say, well, it's only 3% this year. And then 2 years later, it's another 4%. And then maybe it's 2% after that. And pretty soon you increase things by 20 or 25% just by working it out like that. So I'm probably not going to approve an increase in total votes in that situation.
Jim.
I would concur with what Joe said, but I would add that that is a real concern. Generally, we're looking at the whole lake, and what we do involves the whole lake. But there's that particular situation in Downers Bay, and I would hope that our staff could continue to work with them. I don't know, moving the 5 mile an hour zone and changing that around, if that would help. But that would involve the town of Lake George, I believe. But that's basically, I concur with what Joe said.
Mr. Parker.
Interesting part of this job is to encourage people to agree that if I disagree with you, it doesn't mean I don't still like you. I don't see Downers Bay is stressed. Downers Bay has controls. I know that I'm positively sure that we're patrolling Downers Bay as the schedule allows, as the geography allows, as our resources, our limited resources allow. I support the project simply because we have, for a lot of reasons, the primary one is a good applicant who's not been on the lake for a long, long time, but has established a good track record. I'm going to support it.
Kathy.
I commend Matt for everything that he's done at the site. You've certainly done a lot of good things that are environmentally proactive and stuff, but, like Dean said, 7% increase daily. We've seen a 4% increase on the weekend. It's just edging up a little bit. I thought it would be a good idea to take this fact that, I keep hearing the comparisons. Oh, yeah, we're going to have 12 less vessels than what the Sea Ray dealership had there. Maybe we could use this as a window of opportunity to take some more time and leave things the way they are for a little while. I know that I've corresponded over the past year with Lenton and his wife Barbara over what's gone on in the Bay as far as getting together and repairing the septic systems and having the algae situation improve around the deck, all the people's docks. And you've established a wastewater district in the town of Queensbury, which is a model for the rest of the lake. And I think the Bay is making really great progress as far as getting back its life. And to me, increasing the number of boats is just going to be a negative impact on all the good things that have been happening in the Bay. And I have to, right now, vote against that.
Can I ask a question?
Who's going to ask?
The applicant?
And I won't let, that's strange. I won't let him ask us a question. If you want to ask him a question, go ahead, John.
In your training, in terms of the members, not your the other part of your business, but in terms of the members, is there a time that they are told when they cannot come back or come in and go out in terms of creating noise for the folks, the residents in the Bay?
Yeah. So the earliest they can take a boat is 9 a.m. and they have to be back by 7 p.m.
And not that we're dealing with the use of the building, but I would assume that in terms of the building usage, there'd be some kind of conversation with the members about how long they could be there. But there's not. Okay. So given what's been said by Joe and starting things off, and the fact that they have the time in terms of their members using the boats 9 to 7, and he's been a good steward of the lake, and I can support the project.
Great.
I like the aspect that they are going to reduce the spaces for the everyday type loader, and I like the idea that they do have qualified people coming into these, I'm going to call them rental boats, the Freedom Boat Club. And I think that's good for the lake, having more experienced drivers on the lake. I disagree with the thought that by having more experienced boats, it widens the chances for the inexperienced to have more accidents. I don't understand that, but I would support this amendment.
First of all, I want to say that I am impressed with the operation quite a bit. Last year when we looked at this, the property had been run down, and the operator is doing a great job in a lot of different ways that I'm very supportive of. When we approved it last year, though, we did so on a trial basis to take a look in the future, and I don't think we've given that enough time. The Bay is over capacity. I don't know that we should be increasing anything, even incrementally. As death by 1,000 cuts from Dean, I think that's a perfect example of why we have to be very careful with that. One of the questions that one of the residents had was regarding a change in the business model to hourly rentals or something like this in the future. I sat here as we talked and I scanned through the permit that we've given the applicant. I can find no conditions that prohibit that. So if this commission is to approve it, I would suggest that you do something in the ways of, because this has been a discussion here the whole time, that this is a boat club, and there should be something in the permit that precludes them from changing it to hourly rentals in the future. And I don't see that anywhere, and if I'm wrong, point it out, please. And it sure wouldn't hurt the boating safety thing. I'm not sure where I come down on that, because I'm so concerned, as many commissioners have been, that rental boaters were excluded from the new regs, and I don't think it would hurt to tighten that up. So I will be voting either to table or against.
Thank you. First off, I want to say that I agree with the people from the 70 point and so forth, that there's a congestion problem in that bay. Having said that, it's not coming from this outfit. This outfit is not adding to the congestion. I think the commission should look a little further into whether it be 5 mile per hour zones and what. The large amount of boats in that bay come from the boat launch and boat washing station. I don't know, something like 1,400 boats, or how many boats was it last summer came out of that?
Was it roughly 750, Justin? That went through the inspection station.
They lost 750 boats.
Yeah, a lot of that congestion in that bay has nothing to do with the people that live in that bay or the marinas that operate in that bay. So I don't know what to say, but to put aside the building, I see no problem whatsoever with the building. As I probably made that obvious in my earlier statements, but as Dean mentioned a year ago, we sat here and said, well, I think this is too big a jump to go up to 20. And we said, because of the congestion, we gave them half of what they wanted last year. I haven't seen any decrease in that congestion. So therefore, I'm not ready to bump up the number, even though they're better boat operators. I'm not ready to bump up the number of boats operated out of that bay until we do get a better handle on the congestion. But I am in full agreement that the sun deck is not a problem. So I think based on what I've heard here, if it's all right with the commissioners, I think we should take a separate vote on each aspect of this before we make a final resolution that we're going to vote on. So first off, I would like to have commissioners that are in favor of increasing the number of boats the applicant has asked, the increase he's asked for. I would like guys on a roll call vote.
Aye.
Aye. No.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No. Now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 yeses.
Yes.
Okay, so that will be part. Right. On the building, change to a sun deck. Mark?
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, yes.
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 No.
Okay. Put both of them in your application, in your resolution.
Resolution 2020-2. Application number 5234-38-19 M1 mod and also 5234-20-20 DM. Applicant is 10 Cummings Bay Road LLC. Whereas the applicant has applied for a permit to modify a Class A marina to reduce the seasonal berthing by 14 vessels and increase the motorized rentals by 8. Whereas the applicant has applied for a permit to modify a closed-sided peak roof boat cover to an open-sided sun deck boat cover. And whereas the Lake George Park Commission has reviewed the application, supporting documents, comments received, and other information which appears in the record, the Commission has made the determination that the marina project is an unlisted action suit pursuant to State Environmental Quality Review Act of 6 NYCRR 617.5. As lead agency for the purposes of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, has made a determination that the project will have no significant impact on the environment, and the marina application is considered to be a major project pursuant to 6 NYCRR 645-5.3, and public notice has been published and distributed as required. And whereas the applicant has demonstrated that the facility complies with the Class A marina requirements of 6 NYCRR 646-1.2B, the proposed dock modification is a minor project pursuant to 6 NYCRR 645-5.3, and the project is a Type 2 action pursuant to the Commission's regulations regarding the State Environmental Quality Review Act at 6 NYCRR 645-3.6B. And whereas the proposed dock complies with the Commission's special requirements governing docks at 6 NYS CRR 646-1.1c. And whereas the Commission finds the subject marina and docks project will have no adverse impact on the health, safety, or welfare of the public, the environment, or the resources of the park, will not alter the essential character of the area in which it is proposed, will not lead to congestion in the park, and will not have an undue visual, cultural, audible impact on the neighborhood or the park. Now therefore be resolved, the Lake George Park Commission hereby resolves to approve our application as proposed. So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the application as presented. We'll have a roll call vote. Mark?
Yes.
I guess I'm sitting here.
It's
both.
I'm doing
It's both.
It's both.
It's both. Okay, no.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No. 6 yeses, 4 noes. Motion is approved. Next project is a Class A marina modification for a tour boat by Capri Village.
So, Mr. Chairman, while we're transitioning, just one thing that was brought up is enforcement on the lake. Just to let the commissioners know that in the 8 years I've been here, we have 20% increased enforcement time on the lake than we did prior. That was an effort that Ben and I started with and Joe has continued. So compared to 2012, we're at 20% higher patrol time on the lake.
Yeah. And regarding Dunham's Bay specifically, Mark, can you talk about the new buoys that have been permitted?
Yeah.
Who's introducing Capri?
I can do that.
He's still talking about Dunham's Bay.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about Dunham's Bay?
Just wasting time while there's a lot of noise in the room.
Huh?
Yeah.
He's wasting time.
No reason. They're talking
Town of
buoys.
I requested Dunham's Bay, the town of Queensberry, apply to the state DEC for navigation permit to add 3 more buoys in Dunham's Bay. 2 are located by the Route 9 Bridge. There's signage on the bridge, but people going underneath sometimes take off, and they don't know it's 5 miles an hour until they hit the Dunham's Bay. And then one also is located on the northwest mouth of the bay. There's a gap between the shoreline and the buoys, the line of buoys that are out there. I think we're there. That's it. Should help a little bit for people coming out of Carrillo's wetland.
Could the chairman go on with the meeting now?
Good. That's it.
Okay. Capri.
So this is 2 applications, one for a marina modification to add a tour boat, and also a tour boat application for the operation itself. We have Mr. Formosi here from Capri Village representing the marina. He can describe the project and answer any of your questions.
Yes, hi. I'm proposing to modify my existing Class A marina permit to allow for a second charter vessel to operate from my property. I currently have a fishing charter, and I'd like to add a tour boat charter. It's basically going to use the existing dock, which is currently being used by my motel guests who stay there, but now it'll be rented seasonally by John Sorbo for his tour boat operation. There's adequate existing parking. I have an existing bathroom down by the lake, adequate trash receptacles, and the project was just approved by the town of Bolton Planning Department. So,
any questions?
Pretty much it.
No. Nobody has any questions. You can sit down, sir. Anybody else here to speak on it? Yes.
All right. So I'm John Sorbo. I would actually be operating the tour boat. A little bit about myself. Been coming up to the lake since the 60s, since my father kept wrecking rental boats. I started driving the boats in the 70s, so I've been up at the lake. I love the lake. Bought a house in 2006 in Bolton, and I've currently had a boat at Bolton Landing Marina for the last 12 years or so. The operation will mainly be for sightseeing, swimming, snorkeling, and anchoring, and just enjoying the lake. No alcohol or food will be served. I have a 2017 Cobalt boat, which I actually got approved last year in hopes that I would have gotten a Class A Marina last year. So the boat has already been certified as a public vessel. I have my single pilot, I think it's single pilot and engineer or license, whatever the license is that's required. So I have that. Or anything else? I mean, from a congestion standpoint, just listening to some of the conversation, I use the boat every weekend in the summer out of Bolton Landing Marina. I'm not getting another boat, so I don't think on the weekends there'll be much more congestion. Hopefully I will do a little more business during the week, but that's pretty much what I'm trying to do. I've never had any incidents on the lake, and that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Anybody have any questions of the thermal operator?
So they're going to operate outside the, right, Joe?
I beg your pardon?
They're going to operate outside the congested areas, as far as tubing or anything like that?
Based on my review, I think some of your sightseeing might take you into areas of high capacity, like you mentioned Paradise Bay, probably. But as far as recreational towing, tubing, things of that nature, will be outside of areas known to be overcapacity.
As the name indicates, I'm trying to leverage getting people into the Narrows, right? And emphasizing it's probably better off not renting a boat and going there and doing it with a experienced person.
And everything happens out of Capri.
Yes.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir. Joe? Got it.
Okay, resolution 2020-4, application number 5220-48-19M1 and 5220-2-20 SPP. Applicants are Capri Village and John Sorrell. Whereas the applicant has applied for permits to operate a tour boat and modify a Class A marina to add a tour boat, the Lake George Park Commission has reviewed the application, supporting documents, comments, received, and other information which appears in the records. The Commission has made a determination that the projects are unlisted actions pursuant to State Environmental Quality Review Act of 6 NYCRR 617.5, and as lead agency for the purposes of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, has made a determination that the projects have no significant impact on the environment. And whereas the actions are considered to be a major project pursuant to 6 NYCRR 645-5.3, and public notice has been published and distributed as required, the applicant has demonstrated that the activity and the facility comply with the tour boat requirements of 6 NYCRR 646-1.4D and 2, and Class A marina requirements are 646-1.2B. Whereas the Commission has finds that the project will not have no adverse impact on the health, safety, or welfare of the public, the environment, or the resources of the park, will not alter the essential character of the area which is proposed, will not lead to congestion in the park, and will not have an undue visual, cultural, or audible impact on the neighborhood or the park. Now, therefore, be resolved, the Lake George Park Commission hereby resolves to approve the above application as proposed. So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the application. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. We're done. Dave, contract extension for commercial diving services.
So we have been working with AE Commercial Diving, I think pretty successful. We've been talking about the progress that we're making on milfoil. I think it's a quick presentation in November. Roger's been doing our contracting work with these folks. We think from the staff level, it's in the best interest of the Commission and the partnership that helps fund the program that we continue another 2-year term with AE Commercial. Roger, I think it's the same rate?
Correct. 7,500 a week.
So the same rate as
Same terms. There's no exception.
yeah. So we think it's in the interest of the commission to move forward, so we have a resolution to that effect.
I have a resolution to read, Mr. Chairman.
I'm glad you found it.
Resolution. That is a rarity, isn't it? 2020-06, whereas on April 19, 2018, the Commission entered into contract number C20180200 with AE Commercial Diving Services of Manchester Center, Vermont, to provide Eurasian water milfoil control services at Lake George during the 2018 and 2019 seasons. And whereas contract C was due to expire on March 31st, 2020, but included terms which allow for the contract's extension for one additional 2-year term, not to exceed 4 years in total. And whereas continuation of the Commission's Eurasian water milfoil control program for the 2020 and 2021 seasons is critically important to maintain control of the invasive milfoil plant and the Commission's mission to protect water quality and the resources of the park. And whereas the Commission finds that the services provided by AE Commercial Diving Services throughout the 2018 and 2019 milfoil control seasons were consistent with the terms of the contract and provided for a cost-effective and efficient program. And whereas Commission staff recommends continuing the agreement with AE Commercial Diving Services, now therefore be it resolved that the Commission approve an amendment of the contract which would extend the terms through the 2020 and 2021 season, and be it further resolved that the Executive Director is authorized to sign the contract and take all the necessary steps required for approval. And I would make that a motion. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the contract extension for AE Commercial Diving Services. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Next one, Dave. Global employment.
So we've been working with Global Employment Services for how many years now, Raj?
All but one.
5
years.
Forever. The new contract that we have, for whatever reason, was fashioned in a way, I believe, from Albany's perspective, that so we could get a 5-year contract that has to be renewable in 1-year terms. So we're back. Roger and Justin work with Global Employment. I believe their experience has been positive for the vast majority of the time. They were the low bidder that came back under our original contract, and I believe, Raj, we're keeping similar rates?
Again, same rate.
Same rate. So this is up for your consideration.
I have a resolution to read.
You found it? Good.
I guess okay. Resolution 2020-07, whereas on March 21st, 2018, the Commission entered into contract number C201-80100 with Global Employment Services, Inc. of Selkirk, New York, for the purpose of providing staffing and employment services to support the Commission's boat inspection program. And whereas contract C, etc., included terms which allow for the extension of the contract for 4 additional 1-year terms, not to exceed 5 years in total. And whereas continuation of the Commission's boat inspection program for the 2020 season will require staffing and employment services for approximately 50 vessel inspection technicians and site supervisors. And whereas the Commission finds that the services provided by Global Employment Services, Inc. during the 2019 boat inspection season were consistent with the terms of the contract and provided for a cost-effective and efficient program. And whereas Commission staff has recommended continuing the agreement with Global Employment Services in support of the 2020 boat inspection program, now therefore be it resolved that the Commission approves and directs staff to execute a contract amendment which would extend the terms of contract number C201-80100 through December 15, 2020, and be it further resolved that the Executive Director is authorized to sign the contract amendment, take all necessary steps for approval, and I would enter that as a motion.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the contract extension. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. You got to find one more.
That's one.
2008.
I got it. 2020-08. First, I'll tell you that the Law Enforcement Committee did meet, and we talked about things like boat engines and fuel pumps, and it's wintertime. And then we went into executive session to discuss an important issue about the lake. And then we got to this point. Oh, we talked about some rebate money coming from Park Department, whatever. Resolution 2020-08, whereas the Law Enforcement Committee met January 28, 2020 to review matters pertaining to the Lake George Park Commission's Marine Patrol and the Commission's Law Enforcement Program, and whereas active law enforcement cases and their status were reviewed in executive session, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee has reported on the results of that committee meeting, the full commission meeting, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee recommends acceptance of this month's law enforcement report, now therefore be it resolved that the Commission accepts the report of the Law Enforcement Committee, and I enter that as a motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Vice Chairman Parker's report. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Public comments. Is anyone here in the audience want to say something? No, they've been entertained enough today.
I move we adjourn. I'll second it.
We're adjourned.
I'd like to say